English. Why such a title in the Wonderland of Evolutionary faith? One of the reasons is that I just wrote a book. It was published 2 weeks ago officially. And I brought with me 10 copies, that's in Finnish. And you can circulate that. I sell it to poor students at a cheap price with signature. So if you are interested, I have 10 copies with me. If you are interested after this talk. Wonderland, all of you know the name Alice in Wonderland. And the first book, Alice in Wonderland, had this cover picture. So it's from that book. Then there is Charles Darwin looking at me angrily because I have been questioning his theory more than 40 years. 2 times the Skeptic Society has awarded me with the Hoo-ha Prize, Nonsense Prize, and I hope that I will get the 3rd one because of that book that I've just written. I will talk as long as you are awake and I see that you are listening, or when there is nobody left when I stop. You tried to make me 1 year older than I actually am. 24th of November I was born, so I had yesterday a birthday. It was 1947, so I'm a little bit older than some of you. I started my studies at Otaniemi in 1966. The world was very different then. I think I have had a very interesting life. I've been afraid many times because of my opinion. One of the guiding forces in society is the fear of what others think about you. It starts when you are young, at teenage. What do they think about my clothes? Do I have the right kind of mark in my jeans? It goes on when you are in professional life. What do others think? What does the scientific community think about me? I faced these fears many times. I've been in direct television programs. First time in 1981, I was scared to death in that meeting. I was in direct television program in Switzerland 1987, and so on. So what I'm telling to you, I have tested these ideas over 40 years with many people and in many discussions. I would like to have my computer here, but it's not possible, so it's here. I have to run in this direction. Why do I need this? So if you hear me, do you hear me there in the entrance? In the back row?
Lost.
So should I use the microphone?
It might be good because
Okay, then I use it. I have 3 topics tonight. One is more philosophical, the second one deals with biological questions, and then I tell you some stories about my 40 years of experiences. We start with this. I first want to take you to big questions. We have the universe, we have the life, we have humans. And people have tried to explain these things as long as humans have lived on this earth. Basically, there are 2 views. The first one I call naturalism, which says that matter and time and chance has produced us who are here. I call theism, the second view, matter, time plus intelligence. Even the toughest atheists, like Richard Dawkins, admits that nature looks like it has been designed. But then he says it's not. But he admits that it looks like that. Everybody who looks at the universe and biological nature must admit that it looks like it has been designed for a purpose. The question is this real or not? Naturalism says that physical universe, all that exists, is a closed system of causes and effects. There is nothing outside this box. Physical universe is everything there is. This is the naturalistic worldview. The only thing that is real is matter and its interactions. It means that all of you are just matter and interactions, chemistry and physics and nothing else. You are not important. In a final sense, you are meaningless. That's based on naturalism, not on my thinking. Particles in motion know nothing of moral values. You all know how easily we make moral judgments. I came with my wife, whom I met exactly 50 years and 1 day ago. And there were two young girls sitting in front of us. They were very angry, and they were talking about somebody else who had not behaved as they had hoped that they should have behaved. So in this sense, all people all the time make moral judgments, usually of others who are not present, which shows that people have the sense of right and wrong. Particles in motion know nothing of evil. So our experience demands that there is something else than physical universe. First of all, mind and agency. We can effect on physical universe. We can make video cameras, computers, screens, chairs. So our mind can have an effect. Then we have these moral categories, right and wrong. So if naturalism is right, these are not real. We all humans know good and evil, so we can be certain that these levels exist. Any society, any human society, can separate good from bad. Actually, amazingly young children know this. Only a few days ago, our afternoon newspaper, Ilta-Sanomat, said that already young babies understand good and bad. Earlier it was thought that babies are neutral. They learn this later. So all humans have a deep sense of right and wrong from the beginning. If you are a philosophical naturalist, everything must flow from matter. So these moral values, understanding of good and bad, religions, everything must come from physical universe. And then you can of course argue, are they real? Or are they just imaginations? Which means that naturalists must deny the ultimate meaning, ultimate values, and our moral experience. Because in the end, everything is physical and nothing else. When we die, that's all. That's quite a sad idea. Only a week ago I was in a funeral, my cousin died. And when you are in funeral, you realize how people, they have a sense that it can't be here. But because most people hate the idea that that God or that is judgment afterwards, people like to get rid of the funeral atmosphere as quickly as possible. In my family, I'm known as the funeral speaker. So when I didn't speak, my cousin started to kick me and go and speak. And I usually, in a funeral, speak about deep things that people normally don't talk about. People talk about weather, weekend, and what we do in the evening, and what kind of movie did you see. But the real important things, why we are here, what's the meaning of life, people avoid these things. You try that next time when you are in a meeting, in a coffee room. Ask the question, what's the purpose of life? And most people leave the room immediately. Because these are difficult questions. I think that these categories are real. And I don't think that physical universe is everything there is. We know that as intelligent people we can have effect on this world. It's not just chance and chemistry and physics. How do we know that? We have art, we have science, we have technology, and we humans can have real patterns and objects in the world. And we can only explain them by our purposeful activities. That's technology. Human mind has created that out of matter. That's art. And here is a scientific paper. I have been doing science over 40 years. Published about 140 papers. Other scientists have referred to my papers about 5,000 times. So I have been experimental scientist. I also worked 9 years as a research director in industry. So I've been involved in this part also. Here I am allowed. So we have to use the concept of intelligence to explain these things. That means our mind. And we can't explain mind with physics and chemistry alone. So I would like to use for this discussion as a motto something from James 10 years ago written. The progress of science requires comparison of different conceivable models. A false premise built into a model that is never questioned cannot be removed by any amount of new data. So if you have a wrong model, data doesn't shake your convictions. I was told that you had advertisement about this meeting and somebody had torn already this off, if I understand right. Somebody was angry that I talk here. It shows that we discuss about topics that touch human heart in the deepest level. If I would have talked to you about protein chemistry, nobody would have been angry. But if I talk about the origin of proteins, that causes people to be angry. I have been in situations where somebody has jumped up from the audience and started red in his face, attacking, until the rest of the audience kicked him out. So to force people to think, usually they don't like you. We as human people like easy life. We don't like that somebody shakes our convictions, because that causes, in the deepest level, a revolutionary thinking. I experienced this revolution from 1968 to 69. I was very often angry. I was angry at my fiancée, whom I met at that time. I was angry at Christians who tried to convince me about something else. I was wild with my biology textbook, trying to convince that I'm right and I don't need anything else. This is how modern man reacts when you shake the deepest convictions. Man wants to be free, autonomous, no authorities, and do what they want. So the question is, if you compare two possible models, which is the better one? Origin and development of life can best be explained by random processes, or origin and development of life can best be explained by intelligent processes. If you take school books and biology books, this has been ruled out, and that's the only explanation. If you look at history books in our schools, this is what is taught there. History books, I talked yesterday about these topics. Most of our history books says that church has always been against science. But the truth is that whole science was born out of Christian thinking. University system was born out of Christian schools. All the early founders of science were Christians. In my field, Michael Faraday was a preacher in a small church. And without Michael Faraday, I wouldn't have this microphone. Or Maxwell was a Scottish man, a Christian, who said that he does science for the glory of God. Maxwell is probably one of the most brilliant physical scientists there has ever been. For my field, Louis Pasteur, you all know pasteurization of milk, microbes, yeast, and so on. Pasteur was a deep committed Christian. Newton wrote more about spiritual things than science. And some have said that he is the greatest physicist ever lived. So this man who believed that the universe has been created by intelligent God and humans have been made in his image, started modern science. Nowadays, modern science is very much naturalistic. This was only recently in newspapers. Oh, I left that in Finnish language. Sorry for those who don't. But this is encrypted language that nobody understood. 250 years it has been a secret. But everybody understood that it is language. But only recently they were able, by the computer programs, to open of this language. And it was by Germans who were spying Freemasons. So we humans have a natural ability to see when something is created by intelligence. I was with my wife a month ago in Vatican Museum, and there we saw the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Nobody knew what they meant. Only about 200 years the so-called Rosetta Stone was found, and in this stone was Egyptian hieroglyphs and Old Greek language. So this stone was like a dictionary, and suddenly we started to understand what the hieroglyphs meant. But all the time we knew that by intelligence these hieroglyphs have been made. So my question is there evidence of intelligence in biological nature? And now I go to problems in naturalistic explanations. I don't want to start at something complicated, like human beings or dinosaurs. I look at mycoplasma, which is one of the most simple organisms we have. Mycoplasma is a bacterium. It doesn't have a cell wall, that's why forms different shapes and it can grow. It's small. When you put 2,000 mycoplasma bacteria in a row, that's about 1 millimeter. Gives you an idea. My oldest daughter in school wrote an essay, what does my father do? And she wrote that almost 35 years ago. My father studies bacteria, and they are so small, when you put 1,000 of them in one row, it's only 1 millimeter. And she got the highest note out of that essay. So these bacteria are very small, and they cannot really live alone. They are parasitic, and they live, for instance, on our membranes. They get a lot of nutrients from us. You have probably heard how many of our sports people have mycoplasma, and that has affected their achievements. So mycoplasma is, in biological world, about as simple as you can get. Do we understand it? No. I'll tell you a little bit about mycoplasma. About 20 years ago, there was a scientific paper that sequenced all the genes in mycoplasma. It has about 460 genes. One gene produces a protein. That's an old, simple way to understand genes. How many of you have studied biology? Couple of you. Okay, then you know what is gene. You think you know what is gene. I was thinking also until 10 years ago that our whole understanding of genes was changed. But mycoplasma, you could say, parts list is here. What do these genes do? Some of them are responsible of the cell envelope production. Some are responsible of energy metabolism. Some are involved in DNA translation. Some are involved in DNA transcription, how the DNA language is transcribed to understandable language to the cell. Some are involved in cellular processes, some are in DNA replication, some in transport and binding, some in regulatory functions. So one of the most simple bacteria It's such a complex system that we hardly understand what's happening. So if somebody says to you that this is simple organism, don't believe. There is nothing simple, because even the simplest is so complex that we have difficulties to understand. So about 470 genes. I sometimes give this picture to my students. I have it as a paper. And I said that to pass this course, you only have to memorize this. So far, nobody has memorized it. It is, of course, a static picture of what's happening inside the cell. Each of these arrows points to a chemical reaction that is catalyzed by a certain type of proteins we call enzymes. Of course, mycoplasma doesn't have all these activities. Typical cell has a couple of thousand different enzymes. All this is in three-dimensional, continuously controlled and flowing system. It's not static. This is what's happening inside the cell. It is so complex. I tried with one of the Cultor University colleagues who is expert in mathematical modeling to take lactic acid bacteria and asked him to model that. And we had one diploma-työntekijä, Master of Science students. And after 6 months, this other team gave up. He said, there's no way we can model this kind of system. So their model is very superficial when it comes to modeling biological reactions. This is what happens inside your every cell. So you should respect your cells more. I take something simple. This is from the doctoral work of one of my students. The name is even there. This is from yeast cell. This is the central metabolism of yeast cell. You see glucose going there. You see ethanol here, acetaldehyde, which is toxic here, and all the Finns know xylitol. And my student was trying to convert yeast to produce xylitol. And what we simply did, we added a gene into the yeast that can make this reaction. But in order to do that, we needed all this. And each one of these are again proteins that are catalyzing reactions. For instance, the energy metabolism happens here in mitochondria. But I'm not going to go any deeper in. Here you see cell membrane. And cell membrane has also proteins. Each one of these, HXT, is a hexose transport, which means that these proteins are responsible of taking sugar into the cell. And yeast cell has, as you see, 17 proteins just to take one sugar into the cell. Depending on the conditions where the yeast cell is, it activates certain one of these. So even to get sugar into the cell, it's hugely complex system. Again, next time when you make pulla or sima, you should respect yeast. It's enormously complex. I was responsible once in a project where we tried to convert normal yeast to make xylitol directly from glucose, which is a simple sugar. And we could actually do that. And patented that already about 20 years ago, but it never was economical process. So biology is complex system of metabolic reaction, all controlled. Speeds are controlled, reaction rates are controlled, product amounts are controlled, everything is controlled. Yeast has about 6,000 genes. Who remembers how many genes mycoplasma had?
460.
Wow. This was only a test. Let me listen or think somebody else. I usually, in my lectures, didn't use so much words. I had only one or two, and then I talked with people. But now I don't know you, so I use much more. So don't be fooled that something is easy and simple. Here is very basic molecular biology to you. Everybody knows DNA, if not at least as a telephone company. DNA is a book where the information is stored. It's a large book, and when the cell reads it, it converts it into sentences. And this message is then converted to proteins. And here is, can you see it? Enzyme. Enzyme is one type of protein. Enzymes catalyze everything that happens. When you eat this pulla, your alpha amylase starts to degrade starch, and the pulla starts to melt in your mouth. Or if you eat fat, you have lipases that start to degrade fat. If you eat paper, it comes through, because you don't have enzymes to degrade paper. But why do cows eat paper and get energy from that? It's because in their stomach, in their rumen, they have microorganisms that produce enzymes that can degrade paper. We can't. At least I can't. You may try. Molecular biologists who are naturalists are forced to use information language. We talk about genetic libraries, genetic information, transfer of information. We talk about genetic code all the time. We understand quite well, we think we understand quite well what all this means and how it functions. We can write this language. As I said, I've been in processes where we have tried to convert microorganisms to do something that they don't do. For instance, 20 years ago I was responsible to look for a project where we tried to produce with KY bacteria indigo blue. This is the indigo blue color. Most of you have indigo blue. And we converted E. coli bacteria to convert normal sugar to indigo blue. When the bacteria was growing in a flask, the flask liquid turned totally blue. Then we were trying to make xylitol and others. My last doctoral student had a doctoral defense about, a month ago, and he converted lactic acid bacteria to make xylitol and other non-natural sugars. So we can write this genetic language by gene technological methods. This picture gives an idea how proteins are. Actually, yesterday, the famous biochemist Sanger died. He was the one who claimed about 70 years ago that proteins are specific, not random molecules. And the scientific community didn't believe that. He didn't get money for this research, but he did it anyway and showed that proteins have a certain amino acid sequence. They are like letters in our language. If you take my name, Matti Leisola, you can take the letters, and if you put them in specific order, they communicate something. Proteins are like that. Here is one of the most toxic protein or poison that exists. It's produced by Clostridium. And that's why you should be careful if you have meat products that are under vacuum where there is no oxygen. Because Clostridia grows under those conditions. And if your package is puffed up, it means that there might be a possibility that Clostridia has produced this bottle. And you see that only so much, it means 1 to 2 nanograms, which is 10 to minus 9 grams per kilogram, kills you. So it's really toxic nerve poison. And it's a protein. These are models. Each one of these are made out of hundreds of amino acids. Here you have insulin. So that was a toxic poison. This is a hormone that controls your sugar level. Insulin was the first protein that this famous biochemist Sanger actually showed what this molecular structure is. It's made out of 58 letters, amino acids. There are 20 different. And here you see 3 insulin molecules bound together. Here are some other proteins. This is what you need all the time. It's hemoglobin. It's a specific one. Here it has iron. Iron can bind oxygen and bring it where you need it. This iron binds 200 times better carbon monoxide. That's why carbon monoxide, alias hacker, is so dangerous, because it pushes oxygen away and you are suffocated. Here is the enzyme called cellulase that can degrade cellulose. Long fibers of glucose sugar, split them to sugar. Especially various fungi produce that. When a wood or a tree dies, fungi start to eat it. And they use this kind of molecule. And these have so-called active centers, and they start to degrade the cellulose. When I started my doctoral work, I started with this molecule. That was 1975. And there was no commercial cellulase enzymes available at that time. So I ordered from Japan, and the Japanese enzyme was made from snails. I still remember it was Helix pomantia. Snails produced this enzyme, and they crushed the snails and extracted the enzyme, and I bought that. My first experiments were with Helsingin Sanomat newspaper. I shredded it in a flask, added the enzyme and right conditions, and the Helsingin Sanomat was solubilized. And at that time I thought that soon I can read the morning paper, use this enzyme and spread the Helsingin Sanomat on my porridge as a soup. But that never happened. That being involved in commercial production of cellulises. It's produced in huge quantities nowadays. So you see, each one of these, I showed you 4 different types. Oxygen-binding molecule, neurotoxin, hormone, and enzyme. They are all made out of amino acids. And the exact order of these amino acids defines the 3-dimensional structure and the function. So I call these biological machines. They cut, they join, they recognize, and so on. They bring into the cell, they throw something out of the cell, they oxidize, they reduce. And these are the enzymes that are responsible for all the huge amount of chemical reactions in the cell. Are you still with me? At least somebody is smiling. What are enzymes?
Proteins that kind of like nice reactions.
Very good, but you are a professional in this area. What do you study? Medicine. That's terrible.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Then you need to know also insulin and this neurotoxin and all other things. My daughter is a medical doctor, so that was a joke. But I felt pity for her when I saw the amount of books she had to study during the first year. And later I realized that she understood very little of what she was studying. So these are the biological tools. I'm not going to very much to talk about evolution and things like that. This is a famous protein chemist from Weizmann Institute. And this is fresh 2 weeks ago from a net page of one university. And this Dan Tawfik sees the problem. He says that what we really lack is a hypothesis for the earlier stages where you don't have this spectrum of enzyme activity. It means we don't have a hypothesis before we have these enzymes ready. Active sites and folds from which selection can identify. Evolution has this problem. Nothing evolves unless it already exists. This is a very honest admission. We don't know anything in the molecular level. Evolution has a problem. It cannot improve something that doesn't exist. Once you have, then you can improve. His next sentence. The field of protein evolution. Now we are at the core of origin of life, because the simplest cell we know has about 400 and something, 60, 70 genes that produces these proteins. So now the question is, where do we get even one protein right with evolutionary mechanism? And he goes on and says, what this field needs are some plausible, solid hypotheses to explain how random sequences of amino acids turned into the sophisticated entities that we recognize today as proteins. Until that happens, the phenomenon of the rise of proteins will remain something like close to a miracle. Our biology textbooks have explained us for 50 years. That's when I studied biology in high school. Evolution is a fact. Now these top scientists from Weizmann Institute say the origin of even one protein is close to a miracle. We don't know. I give you back this picture because each reaction here is catalyzed by protein. And these people say that we don't have a clue how even one came to be. And that's an honest admission. Proteins are intelligent molecules. And random processes can't produce intelligence. What happens when you randomize something? It loses the information. If you allow chance reactions to change, for instance, Matti Leisola letters in a random way, very soon you have no Matti Leisola, no hope, because the information is lost. If you don't have something to guide, this is what happens. I always like to talk about origin of enzymes when I teach biotechnology. And you can listen, you can hear nothing, because the students are really interested. And then I go and say, this is the end of science. If you want to know more, come to my home. This is how biology textbook from this year teaches our students. We have energy sources, ultraviolet light, meteorites, electrical discharges. We have gases here, we have simple organic molecules, we have protein parts and proteins, and this is how life arose. This picture has been there for 60 years, and the truth is nobody knows. If our biology textbook would be honest, they would say we have no idea. How many of you have seen Stanley Miller's experiment? That is in this textbook again. 1953, Stanley Miller, student in Chicago University, made a laboratory experiment where he had hydrogen, methane, ammonia, electrical discharges, and found some of the molecules that constitute proteins. All the newspapers in the world immediately said the first steps in the origin of life have now been done. Stanley Miller made his master's thesis work. And many science papers said that we are not far from explaining how life originated. I met a colleague of Stanley Miller 5 years ago in Japan. We are actually both in the board of one science society. He said that Stanley Miller's experiment has nothing to do with the origin of life. Why do our textbooks teach that? It's because naturalism is religion, and the society wants our young people to believe that religion. Are you still with me? Yes, somebody. So here is a treasure island. And the question mark is, how did life originate? People have tried to study that for experimentally now for 60 years. They have been digging all the possibilities. But there is one area in this island where you are not allowed to dig. You are only allowed to dig where so-called natural causes can be found. The area where intelligent causes would be, there you can dig. That's forbidden area. This is naturalism. It makes rules that are not good to science. I personally think that we have reached the limits of natural causes. We have no idea how genetic code came to be. We have no idea of the origin of genetic information. We have no idea of protein structures, cell membranes, origin of life, or basic types in biology. I don't think that natural causes can explain these things. This is a famous picture. This is a bacteriophage, a virus that attacks bacteria. It has been exploded here, and the information molecule content here from this virus has been spread. This is an electron micrograph. This is 1 micrometer. And the question is this information real or illusion? What is the most plausible explanation when you meet E. coli bacteria that has an outboard motor, electrical machine that takes it further and it swims? It has a nose and it smells when it's cold or hot or poisonous or food and so on. So the question is, which is more plausible? Most people have always believed in the world this. Nature tells us about creation. Living organisms are complex information processing systems that can best be explained by intelligent causes. All living organisms can best be explained by random mutations and natural selection. This is the ruling scientific paradigm in our universities. Experiment. Professor Lenski is a committed naturalist. He and his team has for 25 years cultivated bacteria, E. coli, and produced 58,000 generations and studied how they evolved. It equals to €1 million our generations. After 58,000 generations, these bacteria are still E. coli. Minor modifications have happened, but all of them are negative information losing modification. I have worked in this area, you see my name here, and doing protein evolution. What happens when we use design or random reactions to modify proteins? You can go and read that paper, where I question the Darwinian method to produce really anything. Okay. Do you want to have a break, have a question, so shall we go to the third part? No. Do you want the third part?
Yeah.
Now I have to take my coat off.
Voice getting off.
I tell you with few examples some of my experiences. All those are in detail in my book. First of all, with students. I love to talk to students because this is about the latest stage where people are still ready to think and consider their basic needs. You may recognize me. These were two of my students, doctoral students, about 1985. We were all critics of evolutionary theory. And this picture has been taken in Switzerland. I worked in ETH, which is one of the 10, 20 best technical universities in the world. I worked there 7 years. And every week at coffee breaks we were discussing evolution and problems in evolution. And at least 6 of my colleagues, 7 probably, became evolution critics during these discussions. A couple of Mexican people, these are Swiss people, one Croatian who is now a professor, and of course these fellows are also about 50 now. When I came to the institute, the professor who is here, the head of the institute, here is our family, part of our family, our children, about 30 years ago. Professor Fichter invited me, his wife there, to give a lecture about my experiences in Finland. So I gave a seminar about molecular biology, evolutionary criticism and Christian philosophy. After the seminar, he walked out of the room and slammed the door. And I thought that now family Leisola flies back to Finland after 1 month in Switzerland. We became friends later. The last time we met them, we spent the night in their nice home in the Swiss Alps without knowing that she had a cancer or was about to die. We spoke about spiritual things together, and some years later he died also. The last thing he asked me was to write about ethics in biotechnology. He said he knows nobody else who would do that, because most bioscientists are very superficial in philosophy and ethics. So I wrote an article, dedicated that to her, and it was published some years ago. I met many professors, of course, during my career. I taught them when I was a student. And the chemical students in Otaniemi, once they decided that they invite me and my microbiology professor to have a discussion at the depot. And to their disappointment, he had no arguments against me. I sent him my book. He is now over 70. The professor who was teaching electrical engineering to me came even to television program with me to say that he can believe that Darwinism can produce some kind of block in a person that doesn't have a hand. But how do you produce a hand with blood circulation, nervous systems, everything that is there, plus the computer that controls that? That's totally out of question. I met several professors who said, go on, but who were too afraid to say their critical views of Darwinism, because you risk your career. In 1981, I invited Professor Wilder Smith, who has probably influenced my thinking more than anybody else in this field. This is from a newspaper article. A year before this, Wilder Smith sat in the office of the rector of the Helsinki University. And Helsinki University rector said, why don't you come and have lectures in our university? When he came, and it became obvious that he's critical about Darwinian evolution, the rector said that he has no idea where this man comes and who has paid his trip here. And after his visit, there were more than 400 letters sent to newspapers against and for evolution, 1981. I was really shocked at that time. He lectures in Otaniemi, in Vilkki, in Portania, in Joensuu, in Tampere, in Turku, and all the local newspapers were reporting about that trip. It was me and 2 other young guys who organized all that. The whole Finnish science society was turned upside down. Ilta-Sanomat in the front page said that if you have been teaching society that 2 plus 2 is 5, how on earth do you change that thinking pattern? And this is what he thought about evolution. I tell more here. Church. He was the bishop. I'm not a Nikolai. He was the first bishop I met. And he said that he is really unhappy about people like me. That is a perfect peace between university and church in Finland, and then persons like me come and disturb that. And I said, I can't understand that. I, as I was at that time about 33 years old. When I tried to speak for Christian doctrine of creation, the bishops turned against me. The Archbishop wrote, actually, a little bit after this happening, the whole page in Helsingin Sanomat. Our church has a long time ago made a peace with Darwin. That is no problem. All our bishops at that moment think like that. I've met many of them. Hopeless cases. They don't know science. And they don't usually want to know science. Publishers. This is the book by Wonderland. I translated that, and VSO, our major publishing house, published that. I was sitting at the office of the boss of VSO with Wonderland, and he said, let's publish that. And I should translate that. And my family was moving to Switzerland, so I didn't have really time. So I translated that this way on a tape recorder, and one Christian student wrote that then down. 3 days after this was published, it was really, really ridiculed in Helsingin Sanomat. Bad book, bad writer, bad, hopeless translation. I called later, I wrote actually the VSO man from Switzerland, and he said that they sold 700 copies, they burnt the rest, forget these topics, concentrate on raising children. He got really scared of what this book was. This is from Aamulehti, Tampere. This is Eläinmuseum museum next to this. When I became a professor, they wrote a Sunday front page story about the professor who questions Darwinism. This was something we made with our friends, 30,000 copies of a small magazine, and I wrote the leading article, Origin of Life Problem, Riddle of the Origin of Life. Publishers haven't liked my books, so with a friend of mine we started our own publishing company. I haven't made any money with this company. I don't even try. Whatever money comes, I use to publish something else. There were 3 young fellows who thought that this topic is exciting. This one studied filmmaking in Rovaniemi. And that's why we had the super cameras and everything. And they went to Yle and said that we want to make a film. They called it their project Tabu, something you are not allowed to talk. And Yle paid this. And I was interviewed. I contacted Professor Dean Kenyon, who has written a book about origin of life. But after reading Wilder Smith's book, he changed his mind. And then I contacted my friend, Professor Sigrid Scherer, from Munich, and some other people. And the film was made in 1995. But the television didn't have the nerve to show it. It took 3 years when they finally saw the film Deep Waters of Evolution, and it was on Good Friday, Pitkä Perjantai, to give a signal that this is totally religious stuff. And in the studio there were 3 professors discussing, but they didn't touch any of the arguments of this film. Kari Enqvist was one. I've been in television on these topics, but television is a propaganda machine to educate people to naturalism, I think. Skeptics, I already mentioned, they have rewarded me a couple of times. He's a priest in Savoten. I was in Japan. I had jet lag, couldn't sleep at 2 o'clock at night when I got an email from him that he would like to organize a big debate about this topic. Because Skeptic Society had given to my friend Professor Tapio Vuolimatka again the Hoo-ha Prize because of his books, Faith, Science and Evolution. And he asked if I'm ready to join, and I said okay. Then they called Skeptic Society, they promised to come, and Darwin Society, they promised to come. And that we agreed in November. They had rented a big Savonlinna hall for that debate. 10 days before the debate, the naturalists, Skeptic Society, Darwin Society said, we don't come. And suddenly it was a funny debate because we were on the same side. He tried to oppose us, whatever he did. Just today I got an email from him because he had read my book and was very happy about it. So Skeptic Society, I've written that, I've said that many times, that I'm ready anytime to talk with you about evolution and origin of life, and they never come. Students in, where was it, Cultor, they asked whether I'm ready to debate this topic with somebody. I said, I'm ready. And for 1.5 years, they tried to get somebody, but nobody wanted. Then they decided that the whole audience will be my opponent. And we had a very good discussion with the audience. Skeptic Society sent me an open letter. And I said, I respond to that if you publish my answer. That's what they did. You can find that in the internet. I mentioned that also here. Because this book is very much also a biography of what has happened in my life. Darwinists are angry. They are really angry. 2004, I was organizing with some friends in Helsinki University a fair discussion about evolution and intelligent design. Two most famous Finnish evolutionists agreed to come, Matti Leisola and Petteri Portin, and I invited, for instance, him, Richard von Sternberg. He has 2 doctoral degrees in biological scientists. And then I invited Paul Nelson, who has studied philosophy of biology. The university rector cancelled the seminar. That was publicized already, and more than 200 people wanted to join. So I had a mini seminar then in Otaniemi, and some students started to collect names against the seminar and gave to Helsinki Matti Leisola, my boss, an address with about 180 names that Otaniemi should not have seminars like that. Matti Leisola is my friend, so I said, go ahead and have a seminar. After the seminar, Helsingin Sanomat said that Technical University wants to bring God into science. Although in the seminar, God was not even mentioned, not even once. Darwinists are really angry. They are for whatever I do, whatever he does. He was the managing editor of a science paper and accepted a publication that was critical about evolution and spoke about design. People got so furious, all the major science papers wrote against that publication. They attacked him personally. His reputation was ruined completely. He had to leave his job in Smithsonian Institute and so on. I had sound with him in Finland. And he's a cat person and not a dog person. We have a dog. He has a Romanian background. He couldn't believe what happens when he publishes something that is critical against naturalistic evolution. I tell the story here in my book, and in his webpage you can read more what happens. I've been speaking about these questions, I already mentioned, everywhere. Here I am in Sukiyaki Party in Japan, 1988. My children especially like his name, he's Professor Beck. He's from Manchester, Germany. I'm Professor Yanada. You don't see it very well, but the Japanese tables are quite small and the chairs don't have any legs. So I was sitting 4 hours like this. And after that they forced me to sing karaoke. This is from Belgium. This year, in February, there is a doctoral candidate and I was in the examination committee. And his doctoral work that he had been doing 4 years was trying to change the activity of an enzyme to something new. He had made about 4 million random mutations. So I asked him in this doctoral dissertation that what are the chances in your molecule to get 2 simultaneous mutations that you want? He had not counted that. And I said, I have an answer for you. It's about 16 million that you need. So it's no wonder that you don't get the 2. But 2 is not enough. What about 3? Then it goes to billions. And I said that, I asked him that, do you really believe that with Darwinian method of random mutations, you can create new enzymes? What method would you choose if you would have to do this work again? He said that he would use design. We can now test Darwinian method with microbes and with proteins and genes. It doesn't work. It's no more question of maybe, it doesn't work. Life is matter plus information. Rock and information, we get statues. We don't believe that they make themselves. Biomolecules and information, we get bacteria. But we all have the feeling that humans are something else. Usually when you read papers, you hear stories how apes, chimpanzees are almost like we. Most biology textbooks say that there is about 1 to 2% difference in the genetic level between chimpanzee and man. That's no more true. Who knows what the difference really is, but it may be as low as only 70%. But these papers usually emphasize similarities. Our hemoglobin, for instance, is almost the same as the hemoglobin in pig. But we still have differences. But there are many things that separate us from animals. We are, as humans, we ponder the meaning of life and death. We understand moral values. We have the ability to speak, learn languages. We have a language computer in our head. We have self-consciousness, sense of beauty. We are able for extreme evil, that must be wrongly written, extreme good things, ability to create, ability to understand the world. I think that is a huge difference between any animal and humans. Philosophies that make us just chemistry and physics are obviously lacking something. And this is the book that I've written. Some of my professor friends who saw only this, they said that this looks so interesting they must read the book. Because I tell about my suspicions, naturalism, students, professors, rectors, publishers, media, church, skeptics, Darwinists, discussions with colleagues, mechanisms that don't function, the gulf that is deepening, and how design is coming to the area of science. This is what I wanted to say, and I used my whole 90 minutes almost exactly. Thank you for listening and not falling asleep.